The summer sun hung low over the dry plains of the Arizona Territory, painting the endless desert in shades of gold and crimson. Dust drifted across the worn trails where cattle had traveled for years, and the lonely wind carried the scent of sagebrush through the empty valleys. To travelers, the Mercer ranch looked like any other struggling homestead on the frontier. But behind its weathered fences and fading barn lay a family on the edge of losing everything. Elias Mercer stood outside his house, staring across the fields that had once been green with grazing cattle. Years of drought had dried the grass, disease had claimed much of his herd, and debts had piled higher with every passing season. Since his wife, Mary, had died 3 years earlier, Elias had done everything he could to keep the ranch alive. He worked from dawn until long after sunset, but hard work alone could not stop the bank from demanding payment. Inside the farmhouse, his 20-year-old daughter, Clara Mercer, was repairing a torn saddlebag. Unlike many women of her time, Clara had grown up riding horses, fixing fences, and helping her father manage the ranch. She was strong-willed, intelligent, and fiercely independent. Her mother had taught her that a person's worth could never be measured by money or land, and Clara had carried those words in her heart ever since. She noticed her father standing silently outside and sensed the weight pressing upon him. Lately, he had become quieter, his shoulders bent beneath burdens he refused to share. Whenever she asked about the ranch's finances, he simply smiled and said everything would work out. But everything was not working out. That afternoon, a cloud of dust appeared on the distant trail. A polished black carriage rolled toward the ranch, escorted by several mounted riders. Clara recognized the visitor immediately. Horace Blackwell. Blackwell owned one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. Wealthy, influential, and feared by many, he had built his fortune by buying struggling ranches for a fraction of their value. Some said he was a brilliant businessman. Others whispered that those who refused his offers often found themselves ruined by mysterious fires, stolen cattle, or unpaid debts that suddenly became impossible to ignore. Blackwell stepped from his carriage wearing an expensive black coat despite the heat. His silver watch chain gleamed in the sunlight, and his confident smile never reached his cold gray eyes. "Elias," he greeted warmly. "I hope you've considered my proposal." Clara frowned. "Proposal?" Elias invited Blackwell inside while asking Clara to remain outdoors. That alone filled her with suspicion. Her father had never hidden important matters from her before. Unable to ignore her growing concern, Clara quietly approached the open kitchen window. Inside, Blackwell calmly unfolded several documents. "You owe the bank $12,000, he said evenly. "The payment comes due in less than 2 weeks. Elias lowered his head. "I know. I've already purchased your debt." Clara's heart skipped. Blackwell continued, "I can forgive every cent of it. Your ranch remains yours. You'll never worry about another payment." Elias looked hopeful for only a moment. "What do you want?" Blackwell leaned back comfortably. "Your daughter." Silence filled the room. "I wish to marry Miss Clara." Elias stiffened. "She doesn't love you." "Love is a luxury," Blackwell replied. "Security is far more valuable." Clara felt sick. Blackwell spoke as though discussing the purchase of livestock rather than a human being. "I'll provide her with a fine home, servants, and every comfort imaginable. In return, your ranch survives." Elias remained silent for what felt like forever. Finally, he whispered, "If I refuse?" Blackwell calmly folded the papers. "The ranch is seized. You'll lose everything your wife worked for." The word struck Elias like a hammer. He thought of Mary's final request before she died. "Take care of Clara." To him, saving the ranch meant protecting the future his wife had dreamed of. But the terrible bargain demanded a price no father should ever consider paying. Hours later, after Blackwell departed, Elias finally told Clara everything. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, tears filled his eyes. "I never wanted this. Clara's voice remained steady. So you agreed to sell my future? I agreed because I thought I had no choice. You always had a choice. Her words cut deeper than any knife. I'd rather lose this ranch, Clara continued, than spend my life married to a man who sees people as property. Elias reached toward her. I'm trying to save us. No, she answered softly. You're trying to save the land. That night neither of them slept. Elias sat alone on the porch, questioning whether desperation had blinded him to right and wrong. Inside her room, Clara packed a small canvas bag with clothes, food, a water canteen, and her mother's silver locket. She had made her decision. Before sunrise, she saddled her favorite horse, Whisper. She left a short letter on the kitchen table. Father, I love you. But my life isn't a debt to be paid. If ending this deal means leaving home, then that's what I must do. Someday I hope you'll understand. With one last look at the ranch where she had spent her childhood, Clara rode toward the distant red cliffs of Red Canyon. She believed she was simply escaping an unwanted marriage. She had no idea that armed riders were already following her trail. Nor could she have imagined that beyond the towering canyon walls, an Apache scouting party was watching every movement across the desert. By sunset, Clara's desperate flight would carry her across a sacred boundary known only to the Apache. The bargain her father had made would soon become meaningless, because once she entered that forbidden land, another destiny, older than any contract and stronger than any promise of wealth, would begin to unfold. The first rays of dawn stretched across the towering red cliffs of Red Canyon, casting long shadows over the winding trails below. Clara Mercer urged her horse, Whisper, deeper into the maze of narrow passes. Her muscles ached from riding through the night, and exhaustion tugged at her eyelids, but she dared not stop. Every sound behind her made her fear that Horace Blackwell's men had caught up with her. She glanced over her shoulder for what felt like the 100th time. At first, all she saw was drifting dust. Then, faintly, came the distant pounding of horses' hooves. They're still following me, she whispered. Whisper snorted uneasily, sensing his rider's fear. Clara urged the horse forward. The canyon walls grew taller with every mile, narrowing into towering walls of red stone that seemed to swallow the morning light. Strange rock formations surrounded her, their shapes carved by centuries of wind and rain. The silence felt almost unnatural, broken only by the echoes of her horse's footsteps. She had no map. She simply hoped the twisting canyon would hide her trail. Unknown to Clara, she had crossed into land the Apache considered sacred, a place outsiders rarely entered and almost never left without being seen. High above the canyon floor, hidden among the rocky cliffs, several Apache scouts watched silently. Their leader was a young warrior named Dakota, respected throughout his tribe for his sharp eyes and calm judgment. Unlike some warriors eager for battle, Dakota believed every stranger should first be understood before being judged. He lowered himself behind a boulder and studied the lone rider below. A woman, one scout whispered in Apache. Alone, another replied. Dakota narrowed his eyes. Not alone. He pointed toward the canyon entrance. A second group of riders had appeared in the distance. Armed men. They rode hard, rifles strapped across their saddles. Dakota watched them carefully. They hunt her. The older scout frowned. Settlers fighting settlers. Dakota shook his head. No. He noticed something else. The men were spreading out, trying to surround the woman instead of simply catching her. They don't want to speak. They want to capture. Dakota made his decision. Ride. Within moments, 6 Apache warriors disappeared into the maze of rocks. Clara had nearly reached a narrow bend when the first rifle shot echoed through the canyon. The bullet struck a rock beside her, sending fragments flying. She gasped. They're shooting. Another shot rang out. Whisper reared in panic before charging forward. Behind her, Blackwell's lead rider shouted. Don't kill her. We need her alive. The words chilled Clara more than the bullets. She pushed Whisper faster, but the canyon narrowed into a dead end surrounded by steep cliffs. There was nowhere left to go. The pursuing riders smiled as they slowed their horses. One dismounted. "You've caused enough trouble, Miss Mercer." Clara backed away. "I'm not going with you. You don't have much choice." He stepped closer. Then everything changed. A sharp cry echoed from the cliffs above. Before the gunman could react, arrows flew from seemingly empty rocks. One rider's rifle fell from his hands. Another's horse bolted in terror. From every direction, Apache warriors appeared like shadows, moving with astonishing speed. Dakota led the charge. His horse leaped over a fallen boulder as he shouted commands in Apache. The attackers panicked. "It's an ambush. Fall back." Gunfire erupted through the canyon. Dust exploded into the air. The mercenaries fired wildly, but the Apache knew every rock, every hiding place, every narrow path. Within minutes, Blackwell's men realized they were hopelessly outmatched. Retreat. The surviving riders turned their horses and fled the canyon as quickly as they had entered. Silence slowly returned. Clara stood frozen. Her heart pounded so hard she thought she might collapse. She had expected death. Instead, strangers had saved her life. Dakota slowly approached. His bow remained lowered, though his expression showed neither warmth nor hostility. He studied Clara carefully. She stared back, unsure whether to thank him or run. Neither spoke. Finally, Dakota noticed the silver cross hanging around her neck. Then he looked at the tracks in the sand. The old canyon trail. His face became serious. He spoke quietly to another warrior. She crossed the sacred path. The older warrior's expression changed immediately. Then the elders must decide. Dakota nodded. This is no longer our choice. Clara understood none of their conversation. What are you saying? She asked nervously. No one answered. Instead, one warrior gently took Whisper's reins. Another offered Clara a small flask of water. She hesitated. Dakota drank from it first. Only then did he hand it back to her. Realizing it wasn't poisoned or drugged, Clara accepted it gratefully. Thank you, she whispered. Dakota didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Hours later, the Apache escort led Clara through hidden trails that wound between towering cliffs and narrow streams. The paths were nearly invisible, known only to those who had lived among these lands for generations. Eventually the canyon opened into a secluded valley. There, nestled among cottonwood trees, stood an Apache village. Children paused their games to stare at the newcomer. Women carrying baskets exchanged worried glances. Elders emerged slowly from their lodges. Visitors were rare. A frightened white woman arriving under the protection of Apache warriors was almost unheard of. Clara climbed down from Whisper. She expected to be tied up or locked away. Instead, an elderly woman approached with gentle eyes. Without speaking, she placed a warm blanket around Clara's shoulders. Another woman handed her fresh bread and roasted squash. Clara blinked in surprise. They're feeding me. The women smiled kindly. Though they shared no common language, compassion needed no translation. As evening settled over the valley, the tribe gathered around a large fire. The oldest elder, Gray Eagle, listened carefully as Dakota described everything that had happened. When he finished, silence filled the circle. Gray Eagle slowly rose. This woman entered the sacred path while fleeing those who sought to claim her by force. Several elders nodded. Our ancestors taught that anyone who reaches this valley under such circumstances is placed under the protection of the spirits until their purpose is revealed. Another elder looked toward Clara. No outsider may remove her. Gray Eagle struck his staff gently against the earth. The spirits have spoken through her journey. Dakota glanced toward Clara, who sat nearby watching the fire, unaware that her future was being decided. From this moment forward, she was not considered a prisoner. She was under the tribe's sacred protection. Far beyond the canyon, Horace Blackwell received word that his men had failed. His face darkened with rage. The Apache have her? One wounded rider nodded. They won't surrender her. Blackwell slowly clenched his fists. Then I'll give them one chance. He looked toward the distant red cliffs. And if they refuse? His cold smile returned. I'll take her by force. Unaware of the storm gathering beyond the canyon, Clara drifted to sleep beneath unfamiliar stars. For the first time in 2 days, she felt safe. Yet she also sensed that her life had changed forever. The people she had feared most had become her protectors, while the man who claimed to offer her security had revealed himself as her greatest threat. 3 days had passed since Clara Mercer entered the hidden Apache Valley, yet every morning she awoke expecting to find herself tied up or locked inside a tent. Instead, she found something she had never imagined: kindness. The elderly woman who had wrapped a blanket around her shoulders on the first evening had become her closest companion. Though Clara still did not know her name, the woman smiled each morning, bringing fresh water, roasted corn, and warm flatbread. She never forced Clara to eat, but simply placed the food nearby before returning to her work. At first, Clara remained cautious. She spoke little, watched everything, and kept expecting someone to demand a ransom or threaten her life. But no one did. The Apache people treated her as a guest under protection rather than a prisoner. Children were the first to approach her. Curious rather than afraid, they laughed whenever Clara struggled to pronounce simple Apache words. One little girl, no older than 6, proudly pointed to herself. Ayana. Clara smiled. Ayana. The girl clapped happily before pointing toward Clara. You. Clara. Soon the children were repeating her name, giggling every time one of them mispronounced it. For the first time since leaving home, Clara laughed. Across the village, Dakota watched from a distance. He still trusted neither settlers nor the promises they often made. Throughout his childhood, he had seen soldiers break treaties, hunters invade Apache hunting grounds, and ranchers fence off land that had belonged to his people for generations. To him, Clara represented the world that had brought so much suffering. Yet every day, she challenged his assumptions. She never complained about the simple meals. She offered to help gather water. When she noticed an elderly man struggling to carry firewood, she quietly picked up half the bundle without being asked. No one had ordered her to do these things. She simply believed they were right. Dakota found himself wondering if she truly was different. One afternoon, Clara wandered near the horses grazing outside the village. A young colt had become tangled in a patch of thorny brush, kicking wildly in panic. Several children stood nearby, frightened to approach. Without hesitation, Clara moved slowly toward the animal. Easy, she whispered softly. She spoke in the same calm voice she had used while raising horses on her father's ranch. The frightened colt gradually settled. Carefully avoiding its hooves, Clara cut away the thorny branches with a small knife and gently freed the young horse. The colt immediately ran to its mother. Dakota had witnessed everything. He approached quietly. "You, horse," he said slowly in broken English, searching for the right words. Clara smiled. "I've cared for horses all my life." Dakota nodded, understanding only a few words, but enough to recognize her meaning. He pointed toward the colt. "You, good." Clara laughed softly. "Thank you." Though neither fully understood the other's language, respect needed few words. That evening, Gray Eagle, the tribe's oldest elder, invited Clara to sit beside the council fire. A middle-aged Apache woman named White Willow spoke enough English to translate. Gray Eagle studied Clara carefully before speaking. "You wonder why you are here?" Clara nodded. I thought your people had captured me. White Willow translated. The elder smiled gently. We did not capture you. He placed a hand over his heart. We protected you. Clara listened quietly. Gray Eagle continued. Long before your people came west, our ancestors marked the canyon you crossed as sacred. Those who entered while fleeing violence were believed to be guided by the Creator. Until their path became clear, they belonged under the protection of the tribe. Clara frowned. So, I cannot leave. White Willow hesitated before translating. Gray Eagle answered calmly. You are free to choose your future. Clara looked relieved. But. The elder's expression grew serious. No one may take you by force. Those words struck Clara deeply. For the first time in weeks, someone had spoken about her future as though it truly belonged to her. Meanwhile, many miles away, Elias Mercer rode alone across the desert. His horse was exhausted. So was he. The letter Clara had left behind remained folded inside his coat pocket. He had read it dozens of times. Each reading filled him with greater shame. He remembered Blackwell's confident smile. He remembered signing the agreement. Most painfully, he remembered the hurt in Clara's eyes when she realized her own father had bargained away her future. I failed you, Mary, he whispered to his late wife. I was so afraid of losing the ranch, I almost lost our daughter instead. Determined to make things right, Elias continued toward Red Canyon. He cared nothing for the land anymore. Only Clara mattered. Back at Blackwell's estate, the wealthy rancher sat behind his polished desk, listening impatiently as another group of hired men reported their failure. The Apache won't negotiate, one mercenary admitted. They say the woman is under sacred protection. Blackwell laughed coldly. Sacred protection? He stood and walked toward the window overlooking his vast cattle ranch. No tribe decides what belongs to me. One of his foremen shifted uneasily. Sir, there are rumors that attacking them could start a war. Blackwell turned sharply. I didn't pay you to repeat rumors. He opened a locked cabinet and removed a map of Red Canyon. We ride in 5 days. The room fell silent. If they won't hand her over peacefully, he said, tapping the map with one finger, we'll take her ourselves. None of the men dared object. The next morning, life in the Apache village continued peacefully. Women prepared food. Hunters returned with deer. Children played beside the stream. Clara helped White Willow grind corn into flour, laughing whenever she accidentally spilled some onto the ground. For a brief moment, she almost forgot the danger waiting beyond the canyon. That peace ended just before sunset. A young Apache scout raced into the village on horseback. His horse was covered in sweat. He spoke rapidly to Dakota. The warrior's expression darkened immediately. Gray Eagle joined them. What news? The scout pointed toward the eastern ridge. Many riders. How many? More than 30. A heavy silence settled over the village. Dakota looked toward Clara. They come for her. White Willow translated the words. Clara felt her stomach tighten. They won't stop. Gray Eagle slowly rose, leaning on his carved wooden staff. Then neither will we. He turned to the gathered warriors. This woman came seeking freedom. His voice echoed through the valley. No person who enters this place under our protection will ever be handed over to those who would treat them as property. The warriors struck their spears against the earth in agreement. Dakota looked toward Clara, his expression calm but determined. You are safe here. For the first time since leaving home, Clara believed those words. But beyond the canyon walls, Horace Blackwell's riders were already gathering. They came with rifles, ammunition, and enough men to overwhelm a small settlement. What began as one desperate father's bargain was about to ignite a battle that would test the courage of everyone involved. Clara realized that her fight was no longer just about escaping an unwanted marriage. It had become a struggle for something greater, the right of every person to choose their own destiny, no matter the cost. The Apache village awoke long before sunrise. A cold breeze drifted through the valley as smoke from the cooking fires rose into the pale morning sky. Usually, the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the camp at dawn, but today the air was heavy with silence. Warriors sharpened their knives and checked the strings on their bows. Scouts saddled their horses without speaking. Everyone knew that Horace Blackwell's men were drawing closer. Clara stepped out of the small lodge where she had been staying and immediately noticed the tension. Children who had been playing only yesterday now remained close to their mothers. The elderly gathered near the council fire, quietly praying. Even the horses seemed restless, stamping their hooves as though they sensed danger approaching. White Willow walked toward Clara with a gentle smile. "You should come," she said. "Where?" "The elders wish to speak with you." Clara nodded and followed her through the village. The council fire burned brightly in the center of the camp. Around it sat Gray Eagle and the other tribal elders, their weathered faces reflecting years of wisdom and hardship. Dakota stood nearby, his arms folded across his chest, watching silently. Gray Eagle motioned for Clara to sit. Once everyone had gathered, the old chief spoke in Apache while White Willow translated. "Our people have protected this valley for many generations." Clara listened carefully. "There is a story," White Willow continued, "one passed from elder to elder since the days of our ancestors." Gray Eagle lifted an old leather bundle resting beside him. Carefully, he unwrapped it, revealing a smooth stone etched with ancient symbols. "This stone tells of a woman who would come from beyond the eastern mountains." Clara frowned slightly. "A woman?" Gray Eagle nodded. "She would arrive while fleeing those who wished to control her." The word sent a chill through Clara. White Willow continued translating. "She would cross the sacred path without knowing it, and her arrival would bring a choice. That choice would decide whether the land knew peace, or endless bloodshed." The council fell silent. Clara looked around the circle. "You think that woman is me?" Gray Eagle smiled gently. "We do not know." He placed the stone back into the leather cloth. "Prophecies do not tell us what will happen. They remind us that every choice has consequences." Clara lowered her eyes. She had spent her entire life believing her future depended on other people's decisions, her father's, Blackwell's, society's. Now these strangers were telling her the opposite. The future depended on her own choice. Later that afternoon, Dakota found Clara sitting beside the stream. She was skipping small stones across the water. He sat a few feet away without speaking. For several minutes, they simply listened to the flowing water. Finally, Dakota broke the silence. "You miss home." Clara smiled sadly. "I miss the memories." He looked at her. "Not the place." She shook her head. "The ranch was home because my mother was there." She touched the silver locket hanging around her neck. "After she died, it was never the same." Dakota nodded slowly. "My father died in battle." Clara looked surprised. "I'm sorry." Dakota stared at the mountains. "I wanted revenge." "What changed?" "My mother." He smiled faintly. "She said anger is like carrying fire in your hands." Clara thought about that. "You only burn yourself." Dakota nodded. "Yes." For the first time, neither saw the other as a stranger. They simply saw another person carrying old wounds. That evening, a scout rode into the village at full speed. "Elias Mercer," he called. Dakota turned sharply. The woman's father. Within minutes, Elias was escorted into the camp. His clothes were dusty from days of travel. His face looked older than Clara remembered. When their eyes met, neither moved. Then Elias slowly removed his hat. "I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "So very sorry." Clara felt tears fill her eyes. You came. I came to bring you home. Before she could answer, he quickly continued. No. He shook his head. I came to ask what you want. Clara stared at him. It was the first time anyone had asked her that question. Elias reached into his coat and removed a folded document. The agreement. Without hesitation, he threw it into the council fire. The flames quickly consumed the paper. I've ended the deal. Grey Eagle watched quietly. The cattle baron will not honor your choice. I know, Elias replied. But I will never again treat my daughter as something to be traded. Clara walked forward. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she embraced her father. I forgive you. Elias closed his eyes, holding her tightly. I don't deserve it. No, Clara whispered. But you're trying to become the man Mother believed you were. As night fell, the council gathered once more. Grey Eagle addressed both Clara and Elias. The bargain has ended. He looked directly at Clara. But another choice remains. White Willow translated every word. You may leave with your father before Blackwell arrives. No one spoke. The entire village waited. Clara looked toward the canyon leading back to the world she had known. Then she looked around the camp. She saw Ayanna laughing with other children. She saw White Willow helping an elderly woman prepare food. She saw warriors repairing homes instead of boasting about battles. She saw people who had risked their lives to protect someone they had never met. Finally, her eyes met Takota's. He said nothing. He did not ask her to stay. He would respect whatever she decided. That, more than anything else, made her decision easier. Clara took a deep breath. I will stay. White Willow translated. A quiet murmur spread through the gathered people. Grey Eagle slowly stood. He raised his carved staff toward the stars. Then let it be known. His voice echoed through the valley. From this day forward, Clara Mercer stands beneath the protection of the Apache nation. Several warriors stepped forward and placed their hands over their hearts. One by one, the women and elders did the same. Grey Eagle continued. We do not claim her as property. He paused, making sure Clara understood. We claim her as family. Tears rolled down Clara's cheeks. No one had ever spoken those words to her with such sincerity. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt that she truly belonged somewhere. Takota stepped forward carrying a beautifully woven blanket decorated with red, black, and white patterns. He carefully placed it over Clara's shoulders. In our tradition, White Willow explained, this blanket means you will never stand alone. Clara touched the soft fabric with trembling hands. Thank you. Takota smiled. You are family now. Far beyond the valley, Horace Blackwell's camp was alive with activity. More than 40 armed riders gathered around blazing campfires. Boxes of ammunition were stacked beside wagons. Fresh horses were prepared for the journey. Blackwell stood over a map of Red Canyon. One of his foremen spoke nervously. We still have time to turn back. Blackwell looked up coldly. I've spent too much money and too much pride on this matter. She's just one woman. Blackwell's expression hardened. No. He folded the map. She's proof that if one person refuses me, others will think they can do the same. He climbed onto his horse. At sunrise. He looked toward the dark silhouette of Red Canyon. We end this. Unaware of the army now moving toward them, the Apache village settled into an uneasy sleep. Clara stood beneath a sky filled with stars, wrapped in the blanket of her new family. She had chosen her own path at last. But freedom often demands a price. With the rising sun, Red Canyon would become the battlefield where greed and honor, fear and courage, oppression and freedom would face one another. And Clara's choice, to remain with the people who had protected her, would be tested, and the sun had barely risen above the jagged cliffs of Red Canyon when the stillness of the Apache Valley was broken by the cry of a lookout. "They're coming!" The warning echoed from ridge to ridge as scouts raced back into the village. Warriors immediately reached for their bows, rifles, and spears. Mothers hurried children and elders toward hidden caves carved into the canyon walls, while young men prepared the horses for battle. Clara stepped from her lodge, the woven blanket of the Apache still around her shoulders. The peaceful valley that had become her home was transforming into a fortress. Dakota approached, fastening a leather strap around his quiver. "Stay with White Willow," he said firmly. Clara shook her head. "I won't hide while others risk their lives because of me." Dakota met her determined gaze. "This fight is not your fault." "Maybe not," Clara replied, "but I won't stand aside while innocent people suffer." For a moment, Dakota saw not the frightened woman he had rescued in the canyon weeks earlier, but someone whose courage matched that of any warrior in the tribe. He nodded. "Then help protect the children." Clara smiled. "I will." Across the eastern ridge, Horace Blackwell surveyed the valley through a brass spyglass. More than 40 armed riders waited behind him, their horses stamping impatiently on the rocky ground. One of his foremen spoke quietly. "Sir, there are women and children in that village." Blackwell lowered the spyglass without emotion. "My quarrel is with anyone standing between me and what is mine." The foreman hesitated. "Miss Mercer isn't your property." Blackwell's cold eyes turned toward him. "Do you question my orders?" The man looked away. "No, sir." Blackwell raised his hand. "Move out." The riders urged their horses forward, descending toward the valley like a dark wave. The Apache scouts saw them first. Dakota stood atop a rocky ledge overlooking the narrow entrance to the valley. He smiled slightly. "They've made the mistake I hoped they would." Gray Eagle stepped beside him. "They believe strength lies in numbers." Dakota pointed toward the winding canyon. "They don't know the land." The chief nodded. "Then let the canyon teach them." As Blackwell's riders entered the narrow pass, silence surrounded them. No arrows flew. No warriors appeared. One mercenary frowned. "Where are they?" Another laughed. "They've run." Blackwell wasn't convinced. "Stay alert." The canyon twisted sharply ahead. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from above. Massive boulders tumbled down the slopes, crashing onto the trail behind the riders. Dust exploded into the air. The retreat was cut off. "It's a trap," someone shouted. Before panic could spread, Apache warriors emerged from hidden ledges high above. Arrows rained down with deadly precision. Rifle shots echoed between the cliffs. The attackers struggled to aim upward while their frightened horses reared beneath them. Dakota moved swiftly along the rocks, directing his warriors with calm confidence. "Do not chase them," he called. "Hold the high ground." Every movement had been planned. Every hiding place chosen long before the battle began. The Apache knew every inch of Red Canyon. Blackwell's men did not. Meanwhile, inside the village, Clara and White Willow guided frightened children toward a narrow cave concealed behind thick bushes. Little Ayanna clung tightly to Clara's hand. "Are we going to die?" the little girl whispered. Clara knelt beside her. "No." She gently brushed a strand of hair from the child's face. "The people who love you are fighting to keep you safe." Ayanna nodded bravely. "I'll be brave too." Clara smiled through her fear. "I know you will." After making sure the children were safely hidden, Clara noticed an elderly man struggling to carry supplies away from the center of the village. Without hesitation, she ran to help him. Together they moved blankets, food, and water into the cave before returning for more. The battle continued to rage outside, but Clara refused to abandon anyone in need. Near the entrance to the valley, Elias Mercer fought beside the Apache warriors. Though he had never imagined standing shoulder to shoulder with the people he had once feared, he knew they were protecting his daughter. That was enough. A mercenary recognized him. Elias. What are you doing? Elias raised his rifle. Making up for my mistakes. The man lowered his weapon. You don't have to fight these people. Elias answered without hesitation. They're fighting for my daughter. The mercenary looked toward Blackwell, then back at Elias. Slowly, he lowered his rifle. One by one, several riders began backing away from the battle. None of them had come expecting to attack families defending their homes. They had been told they were rescuing a kidnapped woman. Now they realized they had been lied to. Furious, Blackwell rode deeper into the valley until he finally spotted Clara standing near the village well. There she is. He charged forward alone. Clara turned as his horse thundered toward her. Blackwell stopped only a few feet away. You've caused enough trouble, he growled. Come with me. Clara stood her ground. No. You belong with me. I never did. Blackwell's face twisted with anger. Your father agreed. My father ended the agreement. You don't get to decide. Clara took one confident step forward. That's where you're wrong. Her voice carried across the valley. I decide. The words silenced everyone nearby. Warriors, settlers, and mercenaries alike turned to watch. I am not land to be bought. She looked directly into Blackwell's eyes. I am not cattle to be traded. Her voice grew stronger. No contract gives anyone ownership over another human being. Elias watched with tears in his eyes. That was the daughter Mary had raised. Strong. Fearless. Free. Blinded by rage, Blackwell reached for the pistol at his belt. Before he could draw it, Dakota leaped from his horse, knocking him to the ground. The pistol skidded across the dirt. The two men struggled briefly before Blackwell reached for a knife hidden inside his boot. Dakota saw the movement just in time. With a swift strike, he knocked the knife away. Blackwell stumbled backward, losing his balance on the uneven ground. He slipped near the edge of a rocky slope and fell several feet before crashing onto the canyon floor below. His hat rolled across the dust. Bruised and shaken, he looked up to find his remaining men surrounding him, not with weapons raised against the Apache, but with disappointed expressions. The foreman stepped forward. It's over. Blackwell glared at him. Help me up. The foreman slowly shook his head. No. You lied to us. You told us she was a prisoner. He looked toward Clara. She chose to stay. One after another, the remaining riders turned their horses away. They had no reason left to fight. Blackwell was left standing alone in the silent canyon. As the dust settled, Grey Eagle walked calmly into the open. He looked from the departing riders to the defeated cattle baron. You came seeking possession. He rested both hands on his carved staff. You leave with nothing. Blackwell lowered his head. For the first time in years, his wealth and influence meant nothing. He had lost because he believed power could force obedience. Instead, he had been defeated by people united in loyalty, courage, and respect. The surviving mercenaries rode away, leaving their employer behind. Elias embraced Clara, thanking the Creator that she was alive, while Dakota and the Apache warriors returned to their families. The battle for Red Canyon had ended, but something far greater had been won than a victory over one ruthless man. Clara had defended not only her own freedom but the freedom of every person to choose their own path. Blackwell's contract had been burned to ashes, and with it died the belief that a human life could ever be treated as property. As the evening sun bathed the canyon in shades of crimson and gold, the people who had stood together, Apache and settler alike, began to believe that perhaps a different future was possible, one built not on fear or greed, but on understanding. The morning after the battle dawned brighter than any before. Golden sunlight spilled across the towering cliffs of Red Canyon, warming the earth that had witnessed so much fear, courage, and sacrifice. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air from scattered campfires, but the sounds of war had been replaced by birdsong and the laughter of children emerging from their hiding places. The Apache village had survived. There were wounded warriors and damaged lodges to repair, but no homes had been burned, and no innocent lives had been lost. For that, the people gave thanks to the Creator. Clara stood near the stream where she and Dakota had once shared stories of their past. Looking at her reflection in the clear water, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. Only a few weeks earlier, she had been running from a life chosen for her by others. Now, she had become someone who had fought for her own future, and for the people who had welcomed her as family. She touched the woven blanket resting across her shoulders. It no longer felt like a gift. It felt like home. Nearby, Elias Mercer helped several Apache men repair a damaged horse corral. His hands were blistered, and sweat covered his face, but he worked without complaint. When the fence was finally repaired, Gray Eagle walked over and examined it carefully. "It is strong," the old chief said. Elias smiled. "It should hold." Gray Eagle nodded before extending his hand. Elias looked at it for a moment before grasping it firmly. For years, both men had lived with stories that taught them to fear one another. Now they stood together, not as enemies, but as fathers who wanted the same thing, a future where their children could live in peace. "I judged your people without knowing them," Elias admitted quietly. Gray Eagle smiled gently. "And many of my people judged yours the same way." The old chief looked toward the children playing together near the stream. "Perhaps they will do better than we did." Elias followed his gaze and nodded. "I believe they will." 2 days later, riders approached the valley once again. This time, they carried no rifles in their hands. Instead, they rode beneath white cloths tied to long wooden poles, a sign that they had come in peace. Several neighboring ranchers had heard what truly happened in Red Canyon. The mercenaries who had abandoned Blackwell had told everyone the same story. Clara had never been kidnapped. She had chosen to stay. Blackwell had lied to justify his attack. Among the visitors were local ranchers, traders, and even a government representative from the nearest settlement. They requested a meeting with Gray Eagle. The council gathered beneath the shade of an ancient cottonwood tree. One rancher stepped forward. "We've spent too many years fighting." Gray Eagle listened silently. Another man removed his hat. "We cannot change the past." He looked toward Clara. "But perhaps we can change what comes next." For hours they talked. They discussed safe travel routes through the canyon. They agreed to respect hunting grounds and grazing lands. Disputes would be settled through meetings instead of violence whenever possible. No one believed years of mistrust could disappear in a single afternoon. But everyone agreed that peace had to begin somewhere. And that place would be Red Canyon. As the weeks passed, Clara became a bridge between two worlds. She spent mornings helping White Willow gather herbs and prepare medicines for the village. In the afternoons, she translated conversations between Apache families and nearby settlers who wished to trade fairly. Children from neighboring ranches began visiting the valley to learn horseback riding from Apache warriors, while Apache children learned to read and write from books Clara had brought from her father's ranch. The fear that had once separated the two communities slowly began to fade. Not completely, but enough for hope to grow. One evening, Dakota invited Clara to ride with him to the highest cliff overlooking the canyon. The sky glowed with brilliant shades of orange and purple as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the distant mountains. For a while, they simply watched the sunset in comfortable silence. Finally, Dakota spoke. "When I first saw you." He smiled. "I thought you would bring trouble." Clara laughed. "I suppose I did." He shook his head. "No." He looked into her eyes. "You brought change." Clara smiled softly. So did you. Dakota reached into a small leather pouch hanging from his belt. Inside was a simple necklace carved from polished stone. My mother made this. He held it carefully. She wanted me to give it one day to the woman who would walk beside me through every season of life. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You kept it all this time? He nodded. I was waiting. He gently placed the necklace around her neck. Clara Mercer. He took a slow breath. Will you stay with me, not because our people wish it, not because of prophecy, but because it is your own choice? Clara looked toward the valley below. She thought of her mother. She thought of the frightened young woman who had ridden into Red Canyon believing she had nowhere left to go. Then she looked back at Dakota. My whole life, she said quietly, others tried to choose my future. She took his hand. This time. A warm smile spread across her face. I choose. Yes. Dakota smiled, and for the first time since his father's death, his heart felt completely at peace. Several months later, the entire valley gathered for a celebration unlike any it had ever seen. Apache families decorated the village with woven blankets, feathers, and colorful beadwork. Elias and a handful of neighboring settlers brought wildflowers, fresh bread, and handmade wooden decorations from their ranches. The wedding honored both traditions. Gray Eagle blessed the couple according to Apache custom, asking the Creator to guide them with wisdom, courage, and compassion. Elias then stepped forward carrying the silver locket that had belonged to Clara's mother. He placed it gently into Clara's hands. Your mother always believed you would find your own path. His voice trembled with emotion. I think, she would be proud of the woman you've become. Clara embraced her father. Thank you. As the ceremony ended, Apache drums echoed through the valley while settlers joined in applause. Children laughed as they danced together beneath the evening sky, caring little about the differences that had once divided their families. For the first time in generations, Red Canyon felt less like a border between two worlds and more like a place where they could meet. A year later, spring returned to the valley. Wildflowers covered the hillsides, and fresh streams flowed through the canyon after the winter rains. Clara stood alone on the cliff overlooking the land that had changed her life forever. The breeze gently lifted her hair as she watched Dakota teaching several children, Apache and settler alike, how to track deer without disturbing the balance of nature. Behind her, Elias laughed with Gray Eagle while repairing another section of fence. The sight warmed her heart. She remembered the terrified young woman who had ridden into Red Canyon believing she had lost everything. Instead, she had found something greater than she had ever imagined. She had found freedom. She had found family. She had found love. Most importantly, she had found herself. As the sun dipped below the western horizon, Clara whispered the words she wished her mother could hear. I was never meant to be someone's bargain. The wind carried her voice across the valley. No contract had decided her future. No wealthy man had claimed her life. The deal had ended the moment she refused to surrender her freedom. The Apache had claimed her, but not as a possession. They had claimed her as a daughter, a sister, and a member of their family. That simple act of compassion had transformed not only her destiny but the future of everyone who called Red Canyon home. And so the story of Clara Mercer became a legend told for generations around campfires and ranch tables alike, not as the tale of a woman who was rescued, but of a woman who chose her own path and, through that choice, united two worlds that had long believed peace was impossible.